They stole my entire college fund, every dollar I earned since I was 12, and they spent it on my sister's $1 million wedding. This is one of those revenge stories where karma doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. My parents drained my entire college fund to pay for my sister's $1 million wedding, leaving me to survive on absolutely nothing. My name is Piper Robinson, and for the first 18 years of my life, I was a ghost in my own home. I wasn't abused in the way you might see on the news, with bruises or broken bones. My scars were different. They were made of silence, neglect, and the crushing realization that in the economy of my family's love, I was bankrupt, while my sister, Tiffany, was printing currency. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand the house. It was a sprawling Georgian-style estate in one of the most affluent suburbs of Connecticut. It had 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, a 3-car garage, and a grand foyer with a crystal chandelier that cost more than most people's cars. It was a monument to my parents' vanity. They loved that house more than they loved each other, and certainly more than they loved me. But there was one thing they loved just as much as that real estate: my older sister, Tiffany. Tiffany was the golden child. She was a pageant queen by age 5, a cheerleader by age 14, and a socialite by age 20. She was beautiful, I will give her that. She had my mother's blonde hair and my father's charisma. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the one who preferred coding in the dark to cocktail parties, the one who wore hoodies instead of haute couture. I was efficient, I was smart, and I was utterly invisible. From the time I was 12, I started working. I mowed lawns, I babysat, and eventually I started doing freelance data entry and basic coding for local businesses. Every single penny I earned went into a joint savings account my parents had set up for me. They called it the Piper College Fund. They contributed to it sporadically, usually when they felt guilty about missing a birthday or a school play. But the bulk of that money was mine. It was my sweat, my lost weekends, my ticket out of that house and into a life where I mattered. By the time I was 18 and accepted into my dream program at MIT, that account held nearly $150,000. It was enough to cover tuition, housing, and give me a start. I felt safe. I felt like I had finally built a foundation that couldn't be shaken. Then came the wedding. Tiffany had gotten engaged to a man who was essentially a clone of my father, handsome, charming, and terrible with money. He came from a good family, which in my parents' circle meant they had a recognizable last name, but liquid assets that were rapidly drying up. My parents were ecstatic. This was the social event of the season. They wanted a wedding that would make the society pages of the New York Times. I remember the planning phase. It was like watching a military operation funded by infinite resources. Tiffany wanted imported orchids from Thailand. She wanted a custom designer gown hand-stitched in Paris. She wanted a 7-tier cake dusted with edible gold. And my parents? They just kept saying yes. Whatever you want, princess, it's your special day. I was happy for her, in a distant sort of way. I assumed my parents had the money. They lived in a mansion, drove luxury cars, and vacationed in St. Bart's. I didn't know their entire lifestyle was a house of cards built on credit and second mortgages. 2 weeks before I was set to leave for Boston, I went to the bank. I wanted to withdraw a small amount to buy a new laptop for my classes. I walked up to the teller, swiped my card, and waited. The teller frowned. She typed something in, paused, and typed again. Then she looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. "Miss Robinson," she said, "I'm afraid there are insufficient funds for this withdrawal." I laughed. I actually laughed. I told her there must be a mistake. There was over $100,000 in that account. She turned the monitor around. The balance read $42.16. I felt the blood drained from my face. My hands started shaking so hard I had to grip the counter. I asked for the transaction history. She printed it out. It was a single transfer, initiated 3 days prior, moving the entire balance to my parents' primary checking account. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I got in my beat-up Honda Civic and drove home. When I walked into the house, it was chaos. Wedding planners were shouting orders, florists were carrying in samples, and Tiffany was standing on a stool in the living room being fitted for her reception dress. My parents were sipping champagne on the sofa, admiring the spectacle. I walked right up to them and threw the bank statement onto the coffee table, knocking over a flute of champagne. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice was deadly quiet. My mother looked at the paper, then up at me, annoyed that I had interrupted their moment. "Piper, don't be dramatic. We're in the middle of a fitting." "Where is my money?" I repeated, louder this time. My father sighed, setting his glass down. He stood up, putting a hand on my shoulder, using that condescending tone he reserved for service workers. "Piper, honey, we had a liquidity issue. The vendors for the wedding needed cash up front. We just borrowed it." "Borrowed it?" I choked out. "You emptied it. That is 4 years of my life. That is my tuition. I leave in 2 weeks." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, stop it. You're smart, Piper. You'll figure it out. You can take out loans. Or maybe go to that state school nearby for a year or 2. This is your sister's wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. Do you really want to ruin it by being selfish?" Selfish. That was the word that broke me. I had worked since I was 12. I had never asked for a car. I had never asked for designer clothes. I had saved every dime, and now I was being called selfish because I wanted to use my own money for my education instead of an ice sculpture shaped like a swan. I looked at Tiffany. She hadn't even looked down from her pedestal. She was busy checking her reflection, completely indifferent to the fact that her party was being funded by my future. I realized then that I didn't have a family. I had roommates who shared DNA with me. "I'm leaving," I said. "Good," my mother snapped. "Go cool off, and don't come back until you can change that attitude. We have guests arriving in 3 days, and I won't have you moping around." I went to my room. I didn't cool off. I packed. I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. I took my computer, my hard drives, and the $42 I had in my wallet. I walked out the back door without saying a word. I didn't go to the wedding. From what I heard later, it was spectacular. The photos looked amazing, Tiffany looked like a princess, my parents looked like royalty, and I was sleeping in my car in a Walmart parking lot in Massachusetts. I contacted MIT. I tried to explain. They were sympathetic, but without the money, I couldn't attend that semester. I had to defer. But I couldn't afford to live in Boston while I waited, so I didn't go. I lost my spot. That first year was hell. I rented a studio apartment the size of a closet in a bad part of town. I worked 3 jobs, waitressing during the day, tech support at night, and freelance coding on the weekends. I ate instant ramen so often my body probably consisted of 90% sodium. I was lonely, I was exhausted, and I was angry. But that anger was fuel. It was a nuclear reactor in my chest. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought of that bank balance. I thought of my mother calling me selfish. I thought of the crystal chandelier in the foyer. I didn't go back to college. I realized I didn't have the time or the money. Instead, I taught myself. I devoured every piece of information on logistics software I could find. I saw a gap in the market, a specific inefficiency in how small businesses handled supply chain automation. I wrote a program. It was clunky at first, but it worked. I launched Robinson Tech from my kitchen table. For the first 2 years, I was the CEO, the marketing department, the coder, and the janitor. I didn't take a day off. I didn't date. I didn't go home for Christmas. When my parents called, I let it go to voicemail. Eventually, they stopped calling. By year 3, I had my first major contract. By year 5, I had an office in downtown Boston and 50 employees. By year 8, Robinson Tech was acquired by a major conglomerate, but I stayed on as CEO. The payout from that acquisition put 8 figures into my bank account. I remember staring at the screen, seeing all those zeros. It was a stark contrast to the $42.16. I bought a penthouse. I bought a nice car. I invested. But I kept my life private. I didn't post on social media. I didn't give interviews about my personal life. To my family, I was probably still the failure who ran away because she couldn't handle the real world. I kept tabs on them, though. It's hard not to. The cracks in their facade started showing about 5 years after the wedding. Tiffany's marriage dissolved as soon as the money got tight. Her husband left her for a younger model, and she moved back into the mansion with my parents, bringing 2 kids and a mountain of debt with her. My parents' spending never slowed down. They kept refinancing the house to pay for vacations and cars they couldn't afford, trying to maintain the image of wealth long after the substance was gone. They were drowning, and they were too proud to grab a life raft. Then, the housing market shifted. Interest rates climbed, the adjustable rate mortgages they had stacked on top of each other exploded. I got the alert on a Tuesday morning. I had set up a Google alert for the address years ago. Foreclosure auction. The bank had finally seized the property. My parents were being evicted. I sat in my glass-walled office, looking out over the city skyline, and I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a cold, calculating resolve. I called my lawyer. I told him I wanted the house, but I gave him strict instructions. My name was to appear nowhere on the paperwork until the deed was signed. It was to be purchased through a shell company, a blind trust. The auction was brutal. The house was in disrepair. Apparently, they hadn't been able to afford maintenance for years, but the land was valuable. There were developers who wanted to tear it down and build condos. I outbid them all. I paid cash. I paid 20% over market value just to ensure the gavel slammed down in my favor. The closing took 30 days. During that time, my parents were given their final notice to vacate. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were telling people a mystery investor had bought the house and was going to lease it back to them. They had convinced themselves that they could charm the new owner. They thought they could stay. Yesterday was the final day. I drove down to Connecticut. I wasn't driving a Honda Civic this time. I was in a matte black Porsche. I wore a tailored suit that cost more than my sister's wedding dress. I pulled into the long, winding driveway. The landscaping was overgrown. The fountain was dry and filled with dead leaves. The house looked tired, like a grand dame who had forgotten to put on her makeup. There was a moving truck in the driveway, but it was small, too small for a house that size. My parents and Tiffany were standing on the front porch, arguing with a man who I assumed was the sheriff. I parked the car and stepped out. The crunch of gravel under my heels was the only sound as the arguing stopped. They all turned to look. For a moment, they didn't recognize me. I look different now, confident, polished. But then my mother's eyes widened. "Piper?" she whispered. I walked up the steps. My father looked at me, taking in the car, the suit, the air of authority. Hope washed over his face. It was pathetic. "Piper!" he exclaimed, stepping forward with his arms open. "Oh, thank God! We heard you were doing well, but we had no idea. Did you hear? Did you hear about the house? Some investor bought it, but we're trying to negotiate." I held up a hand. He stopped. I didn't step into his hug. I stood 5 feet away, an unbreachable chasm. "I know who bought the house," I said. My mother clasped her hands together. "You do? Do you know them? Can you talk to them? Piper, they're kicking us out. Your sister has nowhere to go. We have nowhere to go." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the deed. I held it up. "I don't need to talk to them," I said calmly. "I am them." Silence descended on the porch. It was heavy and suffocating. Tiffany's mouth dropped open. My mother looked like she had been slapped. You bought it?" my father stammered. "I did," I replied. A wave of relief crashed over them. My mother actually let out a sob of joy. "Oh, Piper, oh, my brilliant girl. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. You bought it to save the family home. Thank you, thank you." She moved to hug me again. I stepped back sharply. "Stop," I said.
My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a knife. She froze.
"I didn't buy this house for you," I said. The smile on her face faltered. "What?" I looked at the peeling paint on the columns. I looked at the foyer where I used to stand and watch them leave for parties I wasn't invited to. "You stole my future to pay for a party," I said. "You took everything I had. You left me with $42. You told me I was selfish for wanting to survive. You chose vanity over your own daughter." "Piper, that was years ago," my father pleaded. "We were under stress. You were reckless," I interrupted. "And now you are facing the consequences of a lifetime of bad decisions." "But you bought the house," Tiffany whined. "You have money now. Obviously, you can afford it. Why can't we just stay? We can live in the East Wing. You won't even know we're here." I looked at my sister. She looked tired, bitter, but still entitled. "No," I said. My mother's face hardened. "Then why did you buy it? To spite us? To dangle it in front of us?" "No," I said. "I bought it to give it to people who actually deserve a chance." I turned and pointed to the black SUV that had just pulled up behind my car. Two people stepped out, an architect and a project manager I had hired. "I'm rezoning the property," I announced. "I've already been approved by the town council. The Robinson estate is being dissolved." "Dissolved?" my father asked, pale. "I'm turning it into the Robinson Center for Technology and Arts," I said. "It's going to be a free community center for underprivileged youth, kids who have the smarts and the drive but don't have the funding, kids whose parents can't or won't support them." I looked my mother dead in the eye. "It's going to provide scholarships, coding boot camps, and art studios. It's going to be everything this house never was. It's going to be useful." "You can't do that," my mother shrieked. "This is our home. You're turning it into a charity case?" I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "I'm turning it into a legacy, Mother, something you failed to build." I checked my watch. "You have until 5 p.m. to remove your personal belongings. Anything left after that becomes the property of the Robinson Center. I've hired security to ensure the transition is smooth. They arrive in 10 minutes. I turned around and started walking back to my car. "Piper," my father yelled after me, "you can't leave us like this. We're family." I stopped at the car door and looked back one last time. "Family supports each other," I called back. "You made it very clear 10 years ago that I wasn't part of your investment plan. Now, you're not part of mine." I got in the car and drove away. I watched in the rearview mirror as they stood on the porch of the house they no longer owned, looking small and defeated. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. For the first time in my life, looking at that house, I felt clean. They spent their millions on a single day of vanity to impress people who didn't care. I spent mine to build a future for kids who actually need it. The renovation starts next week. I'm naming the scholarship fund after the only thing they left me with, the Resilience Grant. As for my parents and Tiffany, I hear they're staying in a motel on the highway. I hope they saved some of that cake. They're going to need it.